Hi, I'm Nora Stanger. I am the Appalachian Outreach Coordinator for Sinclair Community College in Dayton, Ohio. And today I get to interview Kathy Rowell, who is one of our professors. Kathy, would you tell a little bit about yourself?
Hi, I'm Kathy Rowell. I'm a professor of sociology at Sinclair. I've been at Sinclair now for 26 years, and my family's Appalachian. My mom is originally from Eastern Kentucky. My dad's from Western Kentucky, so not considered part of the Appalachian region, but
Feel very similar.
yeah, very, very similar.
Yeah.
And I teach sociology, and my research background is in poverty and housing issues. That's where I've spent most of my research.
How do you feel that you were raised? Do you feel that even if you didn't grow up in Eastern Kentucky, that you were raised with that Appalachian flavor?
Yeah, so my family, I was born across the street from where Abraham Lincoln was born, believe it or not. And when I was a baby, I took a bath in the same creek he did. Story. So that's kind of my only little claim to fame. My parents are part of the Great Migration. My dad was one of 13 children, and he was the youngest. So when I was born, my mom didn't graduate from high school. And so when I was born, they were living on a very, almost like a shack they were sharecroppers on a farm. And they decided that they needed a better life for their children. So they packed up everything they had in one car. It fit in the car. And they moved to Dayton, Ohio. It's a story of many white and Black families came here. And my dad ended up working in a factory the rest of his life. He worked at Frigidaire, Delco, and General Motors. We lived in a little town called New Lebanon, Ohio, which was a lot of Appalachian folks there. I didn't know it at the time. I knew I was different. They used to call us Briars, was what they called us. They never really called us Appalachian. I never heard that word till I got to college, to be honest. I knew my dad and my mom wasn't born in Kentucky. Her family moved back and forth between Ohio and Kentucky. They would get a little bit of work here, make enough money to go back home.
Right.
They would come here to get a little bit of money, but they'd go back home and then we'd run out. They'd come back here for work. So sorry about that.
That's all right.
But so I grew up in New Lebanon, Ohio, and I knew we were a little different. My mom had a little bit of an accent. I knew my mom didn't have a degree, like she didn't go to high school. And I first started understanding we were a little bit different. Kids made fun of me. I had a little bit of an accent that I lost over time, but my lunches, my school lunches is how I knew things were different. So I don't know if we would have qualified for government benefits, but my family would never have applied, right? That was just something we didn't do. So my lunches didn't look like other kids' lunches, right? So we would have like a piece of cornbread or Vienna sausages in a can.
Yeah.
Like, I remember other kids would look at that. Like, I knew something was weird about our family because of school lunches.
Yeah.
That's when I first started recognizing my school lunch looked different than other people's school lunches. And then when I would go home to Eastern Kentucky, especially, I knew that my family looked differently by how they were living, because they were still living. Some of them were still living in tar paper shacks. There was a lot of poverty, and they sounded different than other people, right? There was a different accent, and unfortunately, when I was being raised, there was a lot of shame in that, right? We were taught to, I don't know that we were taught it, but there was a lot of shame. And I think one of the things that I was raised, I learned years later, because my kids say I raised them this way. The other day, it kind of hurt my feelings. Somebody said, you're one of those people that sometimes sees the glass half empty all the time. And I'm like, not really. It's that Appalachian fatalism. I was raised that you don't get your hopes up too much, right? So I didn't know there was a term for that, but we were taught you don't get if something good happens, be calm about it. Don't brag about it, because that's bragging.
All right.
So when your life's better than other people, you never brag, because tomorrow your life may not be.
Exactly.
So I was raised like that, and I'm okay with that, right? I was taught to be ashamed of that, like there's something wrong with it, but I'm actually okay with being raised like that. And so but I didn't necessarily know till later that I was really different.
Now, when you said that you didn't recognize you were Appalachian with that term until you were in college, I was exactly the same way. When you realized that, do you remember what kind of thoughts that brought to your mind?
Yeah, I found out that I was, or realized it, because I had a professor who was Appalachian, who I love. She was, I'll say her name because I still give her credit. Her name's Dr. Marilyn Mazie. She was a professor of political science at Wright State, and she was from West Virginia.
Oh,
She had a little bit of a twang, and she's a PhD. So it was my first experience with an Appalachian woman,
very
a
good.
PhD, and she read one of my papers. And she said, honey, I want to see you after class. So she became my lifetime mentor.
Wow.
3 years ago, she still checks on me. She went on to become provost of West Virginia University, and she's been
Wow.
at 2 colleges. I am so fortunate to have this woman in my life. She's retired and living in Ohio now, and still, checks on me. But
Isn't that a great statement to the power of mentorship and having relationships with others who are like you, but have been able to go farther? It's a responsibility for all of us, I think.
Thank you. And I think what I've come to understand, I was a good student, knock on wood, however it came to be.
Right.
I was always a good student. I was going to be okay in college. But I would not have been all I could be without a mentor. So I thought, and not that there's anything wrong with this, but coming from Appalachia, the idea that I would even just be a high school teacher. My mom didn't go to high school. I was not just first generation high school. I was first generation, high school and college. I thought I'd just be a teacher, right? The idea of being a teacher was pretty, wow, this is great. She read my paper. She goes, honey, you need to be a college professor. And I didn't even know that was possible. So I think mentoring helps us, we talk about student success, but a lot of students don't know that they can even be more, right? We often think about just mentoring and reaching out to the students who aren't good students. But I think we have to really carefully look at the students who are good students.
Absolutely.
Because they're not being all they can be. Because they don't know they can. I had no idea. She ended up being my master's thesis director, and then was with me through my doctor. She's just always been in my life.
That's beautiful.
And I would not have been a college professor today without her. I would have been a high school teacher. And again, nothing wrong with that.
Right.
Well, first generation college students, especially if they're good students, they do need to know they can be more than whatever their dreams are. Because they might be able to be more, but I was taught I couldn't be.
Well, what did your parents think of you going to school for so many years? Was there any kind of attitude they had about it, or were they totally for it, or what was your experience that way?
So I don't think mine is a normal Appalachian experience. I mean, and who knows what that is?
Right.
About that too. So my family also were very. It's also the time period. They were very much, they were raised in a traditional religious home. So the idea that I would even want to go to college was sort of frowned upon. And unfortunately, my mom was never really proud of me. So she never, and my grandmother was worried that I would become too high and mighty. So I never really, my brother is a doctor, and they were very proud of him. He was younger than me. But I think they also didn't understand what it meant to be they didn't understand what a PhD in sociology is. Right.
It's another
but they
world.
were not very supportive. They didn't think I was being a very good wife and mother. And part of that, I don't think that's I don't necessarily think that's Appalachian. I think it's also just the traditional time period. You and I, when we first started going to college, and when I wanted to get a PhD, it was just not something moms were doing. Right. So,
well, I'm thinking I didn't know what a PhD was when I was in college. I didn't know until I was a senior in college that there wasn't hardly anything you could do with a bachelor's in psychology, and I had to go for a master's, and that was shocking. What's a master's?
Yeah, I didn't know any of that either.
You're right.
I didn't know any of that. So unfortunately, I didn't really have family. They may have been proud of me. It's hard to know. I think it was also hard. It was hard because they didn't have those opportunities.
Right.
So there's also just all of that you have to process.
Yes.
There wasn't much family support for any of this. And fortunately, mentorship. right?
Yeah.
I'm so thankful for women who paved the trail before me, who I'm really thankful for some Appalachian women who saw
Yes.
something in me that I didn't even know about.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about Appalachian women because that I'm partial too. You know,
Yeah, hey, I got to get something to show you. Hang on.
okay.
So I don't even know if it still happens, but some Appalachian women at Sinclair used to take me to the Women of Appalachia conference.
Yes, I've been
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So when I got hired at Sinclair, Tess Little and Carol Ball found out I was Appalachian. Tess Little was an artist, and Carol Ball was actually a humanities staff person and went on and became a teacher and went and got her degree. They grabbed onto me, latched onto me, and mentored me while I was here.
That's
right.
great.
So there was this whole thing about Appalachian women who had gotten education, who I think embraced me, but also probably recognized that might not have had the family support that we should have had.
Yes.
And again, I'm not angry about that. I think I'm not the only person that would have that story come from an educated family. And I don't even know if that's Appalachian. I think it's a lot of cultural families about women getting education. Yeah, I was so thankful they latched on to me when I first started
That's
working.
wonderful. What kind of memories do you have of growing up, and what you did for entertainment, or how you spent your time outside of, high school or elementary school?
I think it's unfortunate today because all the stereotypes of Appalachians are not my stuff, not my life. We were hardworking people, right? So,
oh yeah,
busy. That idle hands makes for devil's play.
Exactly.
I mean, we were busy. So growing up, somebody always had a garden, and somebody was always canning. And if you weren't gardening and canning, it was berry season, apple season. You were always doing something for food.
Exactly.
Right. And that's even living in modern times. We always were doing something around food. Cooking, cooking, making cornbread. Cornbread will always be a staple in my life. And I mean, I didn't know I only knew there was Wonder Bread and cornbread. I remember when I got married, my husband at the time pulled out wheat bread. I had no idea. That's bad. I had never seen that. It was Wonder Bread so cooking, your hands, quilting, crocheting.
Oh, yes.
I learned a needlepoint. I learned to crochet. I was never really good at quilting, and just busy. You were busy. You were physically always doing something. We played, but play even would be, you'd be out on a porch shucking beans.
Exactly.
And listening to music and talk. It was a lot of talking, right? You'd be sitting out on the porch shucking beans, which is a miserable job. And then there was always storytelling.
Oh, yes.
Right. So we didn't have much TV, and not just the time period. We just weren't a TV person. And then my mom and dad were very faithful. They were very engaged in the church. So all the extra time we had was in the church.
Yes.
So, and our home, there was always people in our home having food. And my grandmother too. It was always gatherings of lots of food.
Isn't that?
Didn't have much, but you'd cut up the tomatoes, the cornbread, soup beans, and it would be like a feast. But there was always
it didn't have to be filet mignon. It was the tomatoes and the soup beans. And as you were talking, I think of how food was central to, I love you, I'm taking care of you. Even if it was the last morsel we had, the most generous people I've ever met are those who have struggled to have food. So that's really
interesting. I've carried. I think I bother my friends. I always offer to pay if they give time and go to have a meal with me. And I've always liked to have people in my home for food, and I will often pay for. I ask someone to spend time with me, I'll offer to pay for their meal. They was like, we don't always have to pay, but I don't always have time to cook. But that's my heritage.
Yes,
exactly. That is one of the most powerful things I have taken away from my heritage, is generosity around food. Right. We never had money, right? You really couldn't loan money to people. It wasn't like there was money, but there was always, even if you couldn't, there was not much food, you would make a big pot of beans and a big thing of cornbread, and there would be a gathering.
That's right.
And
That's
tomatoes. I
right.
remember cutting up and green beans. I'm a green bean person. But we called it the mess, the mess of beans.
Make a mess. I make
Yeah,
a mess of beans.
So,
And yeah.
really understanding what a potluck truly was about. A potluck was really about what you had in the cat. We would just get together and everybody would bring dishes. So that I think my fatalism, my Appalachian fatalism, gets taught to being negative, and it's not. It's just I don't want to get too hopeful. It's just
exactly. It's that being prepared. Don't count your chickens before they hatch. Be ready.
I cannot change that. I've tried, and it's just how I am.
I'm the same way.
I tried and worked hard. My kids told me I gave it to them too. They cursed me. And then I will always, till the day I die, be generous with food. I will. I feel if I'm out with friends, I will offer to pay. I don't always get to have them in my home like in the old days.
Right.
It's just that generosity of food and fellowship is important.
What do you think are some of the strengths of the Appalachian culture? We always hear about the weaknesses. What do you think some of the strengths are?
Well, the one I have never met an Appalachian person who is not generous with food. It's just
amen.
And when I go to Guatemala, so I take students to Guatemala, and I fit in really well there. They have the same. I think there's some anthropological research about mountain folk, right? So mountain folk globally were often the last to get transportation. This isn't just us. And they didn't have the same migration patterns. They didn't have the same food coming in and out, right? So they weren't able to get access food like other people because it took forever for stores to come. But generosity with food is definitely something that I will go to my grave, and I've raised my kids to be like that. Like, generosity with food. If you got it, you give it. I think I don't actually see "don't get your hopes up" as a curse. I actually think it's given me a more balanced life, especially when you're dealing with hard times. So when there are hard times, which there have been a lot, I am thankful for some of the so-called culture of poverty things that we're taught. They've enabled me to have less stress, right? I'm like, okay, something bad happened today, but a couple months from now, something
right. We roll with it. We just, but we don't become so over optimistic that we get in over our heads, and then then oh my goodness, then what do you do?
Yeah, I think the other thing is it's kind of hard to explain, and I don't think I always recognized it, but the importance of nature and like the woods.
Yes.
Right. So I think that story's been lost in Appalachian culture a little bit. But we're seeing a resurgence of that. I've joined a couple Appalachian environmental organizations. It was taken from us with the coal mining and the mountaintop removal. I think culturally, because we were living off the land, I think that when I take a walk in the woods, I'm at the happiest I was. And as a child, we're always walking in the woods, looking for mushrooms, looking for ginseng. So I think that feeling that I get about nature and mountains, right? When I drive into Southern Ohio or down in Kentucky, I got to go to Ireland and Scotland. Those mountains, there's a feeling there.
It's a spiritual thing. It is, and it's very spiritual.
There's a feeling I get when I see those types of mountains, green, that I don't have anywhere else. And I can't explain it. I've been in the Rocky Mountains, they're great, but it's
not the same, is it? No, it's so beautiful. I am so grateful. When I was younger, I wasn't always proud because I did grow up very poor, and I did have a different accent. But now looking back, I'm so very proud of my heritage and the strength of the people, especially the women in my family, in my heritage. So
there's some things that I'm really proud of, and then other things that, unfortunately, like poverty, that you convince yourself as Appalachian, right, when it really isn't, right? So unfortunately, we've got addictions in that area and lots of other things. But I thought I had a lot of shame thinking that was our people, when I've come to understand, no, that's the aftermath of some pretty horrible things happen to a geographical area.
Exactly.
So the generosity especially with food, is something
Yeah.
that I think I'm thankful that I'm like that. I didn't know everybody wasn't.
Yes.
I had no
Yeah.
idea. I thought that was
Right.
normal. Like people are like, I thought that was normal. So
Right. Well, Kathy, is there anything else you'd like to share with us about being Appalachian or about the culture?
I hope that I worry about it.
Yeah.
I worry about the, younger people growing up down there. It's not easy sometimes when I go back home or around that area. I worry about it. I worry about the environmental degradation still happening in those communities.
Yes.
And there's a richness and a beauty to that geographic area. I think there's a lot of movement for like environmental tourism, which I love. I worry for the folks. I think, unfortunately, some of the things that have happened politically, they're often painted as, being ignorant and
Yes.
down with deplorables. And that was hard for me to hear. I remember when that whole deplorable thing came out.
Yeah.
When most of the people I know are like everybody else, they're trying their hardest and their best. And some of what's happened down there was way out of their hands, right? And the way that our country has chosen. I read a really good article on sacrifice zones. So we choose different people to sacrifice. And I think let's take the mountain people and make them work in coal mining. Let's do mountaintop removal and make the water tainted. And they're raised in areas with high cancer rates and high other health issues, especially like the black lung disease. So when we think about the economic system of this country, we've chosen geographical areas and peoples to oppress. And unfortunately, I'll just end with this, the war on poverty. I still remember as a kid, John F. Kennedy, there was a little statue of him in the homes of everybody. Because we thought he was going to come down to Appalachia, and he and Lyndon B. Johnson really talked about, we've left a group of people behind, and then they just continue to be left behind. And I don't want to compare them to other groups because I think that's not what this is about. But there's a group of people that have been left behind economically in this country who are, unfortunately, I think the stereotypes are that they're lazy.
Yes.
They're some of the hardest working people I know. My family worked hard.
Yes.
We're always working.
Yes.
But I'm thankful for my heritage. I have a child who made a decision to go to West Virginia University, even though he was raised in Ohio.
Very good.
Yeah, he made a decision to go to school there, and I think it's been a powerful thing to see. I appreciate you.
Oh, I appreciate you. We do come from a unique and beautiful people, and if we can help them remember that they're unique and beautiful, I think then we conquer most of the problem. So
yeah, there's so many good things about it.
That's
lost to the media, and not without their problems. And
right.
Yeah, we all have them.
Sure.
That generous spirit.
Yes,
that's my heart. So.
Well, thank you for giving your afternoon to me, Kathy.
Yeah,
I really
appreciate my delay. Yeah, thank you.
No worries. This was beautiful.
Okay, bye.
You take care.
Bye.